Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is BestInSlot and welcome to our Jurassic World Evolution 2 re-review. We're taking a look back over the last year or so of the game. The game came out on the 9th of November 2021, so that's just under a year away. In 2 days time, it's the 1 year anniversary of the game and hopefully we'll do something else for that. So today we're going to do our re-review, and how we're going to do that is a little bit different in that what we're going to do is we're going to watch my old review video. And after each major point, after each discussion subject, yada yada yada, we'll pause and we'll talk about how the game has changed since then, how the game has improved, whether certain things have been addressed, and at the end I'll give an updated score. My original review is quite in-depth, it's 22 minutes long, so this will be a fairly long video, but I'll try to be relatively snappy. Unfortunately, this means I have to listen to myself for 22 minutes, which is deeply upsetting. Let's get started. Jurassic World Evolution 2 attempts to surpass its predecessor in 3 primary ways: dinosaur behaviour and variety, biome variety, and deeper management. All 3 of these are successful in varying degrees, and the game will launch on Tuesday the 9th in substantially better condition than the first game launched in back in 2018. Make no mistake about it, this is a better game than the first. The real question then is how much better? And that's still true, it is a much better game than the first game was. The first game has had a little love lately because it was still modding capable, so people were still hanging out on it. I've done some videos on the first game lately, but other than those modding capabilities, there really is nothing that the first game has. You could argue that it's got a better campaign. I would argue it's got a longer campaign, not necessarily a better campaign. For the purposes of this review, I'm going to assume you're somewhat familiar with the first game and brush over some modes like Challenge and Sandbox, which are largely identical in how they were the first time around. The cliff notes are that the former, Challenge, tasks you with building a park with certain limitations determined by difficulty choice. I'm not sure I ever got that vehicle skin, you know. You've got to try to get to 5 stars. And the latter is a free-for-all where you're able to do whatever the blim blam you would like. The 2 modes that have changed are the campaign and the brand new Chaos Theory mode. The campaign this time ditches the park building, island hopping and incessantly annoying contract missions for a much tighter experience. You'll largely be focused on researching and saving dinosaurs, and the vehicles, both land and air, are much more heavily involved in the process. I actually found it to be quite a refreshing change after the first game's campaign tedium, and I really enjoyed hopping around all the different biomes, taking on tasks set by the returning cast members. Still very true, I do think the campaign was a nice change of pace, and the addition of the Biosyn campaign that we got was pretty necessary. I'm still surprised to this day, and I think it'll probably come up, that the campaign hasn't been expanded. Unfortunately, the mode is incredibly short, lasting between 3 to 4 hours, and that's really if you are taking your time a little bit. And as with the first game, the story is scarcely there. Yeah, so I want to talk about that a little bit. The campaign is still super short, super duper short, and they definitely went in a very different direction, and you kind of have to include Chaos Theory to an extent, because it's not Sandbox, it's not Challenge. It is kind of a little campaign in and of itself. But I do think the primary campaign, I appreciate a lot that they wanted to move away from the park building aspect, and even with Dominion, although less so with the Dominion expansion, that had some park building in it more so. But the second mission with the poachers and stuff, they are still mixing it up. One of the things I'm sure I'll talk about in this video is that Evolution 2 suffered a little bit for not mixing up its basal gameplay enough, and they have tried to address that with the campaign expansions. I still think the default campaign feels unfinished, however. It feels like it ends just when it kind of gets started, so I'm still really surprised that we haven't had a genuine campaign expansion. The Dominion Biosyn expansion is a separate campaign, not an extension to the existing one. Feels like it's building up to something before ending suddenly and limply. There you go. It feels as though the delay of Dominion has cut this campaign short, as though there was meant to be a few more hours here to round out the story and make the campaign a satisfying whole. It doesn't need to match the 30+ hour of the first game at all, but an enjoyable 7 or so hour experience would have been much more fulfilling. I love the content here, it is actually really enjoyable, I just want more of it. Yeah, and to mention the story thing, when the first game was coming out, I talked to the writer of Jurassic World Evolution 1 when we were in LA doing the promo preview media thing for this game. And in general, there was a lot of talk about how this was going to be a park builder, a zoo game with an actual story, with a proper story. And the first game absolutely didn't manage that, and I've got to say the second game doesn't really manage it either. It's definitely better, it's a step in the right direction, but there is nothing in the writing that's interesting or deep or just anything to it, really. It's very paint by numbers. I really want them to push the... If they're going to do more campaign missions, what I'd love to see is the storytelling boundaries to be pushed a little bit further. That said, time usually spent on the campaign in the first game... I still love these videos though. It's now likely to move to the new second story mode, Chaos Theory. This is a series of 5 maps with a rather suspicious looking gap for a 6th that tasks you with a what if scenario from Jurassic Park and Jurassic World history. What if the original park had worked out? You know, you never hired Dennis Nedry. What if Jurassic Park San Diego hadn't been cancelled? As these are effectively story as well, they also include returning cast members with voice acting, and voice actors for the likes of John Hammond and Simon Masrani. All in all, I'd say this mode adds at least 15 or so hours to the total experience, and when taken with the main campaign, that means Evolution 2 has a decent chunk of content, and that's even before you dig into sandbox and challenge modes. Yeah, I would say that Evolution 2 does offer a decent amount of content. Chaos Theory has improved a lot since launch, mainly in difficulty options. I never really found it that hard, but the Jurassic Park one could be somewhat challenging. It was a little bit brutal at the start. I think it probably turned away a lot of people. If you played the game back then on launch and you were trying out Chaos Theory and you were really struggling, I would suggest now is a good time to come back in because they have eased off the difficulty with things in particular like dinosaurs fighting and their reaction to storms and stuff like that, and the spread of diseases as well. Chaos Theory is actually an interesting mode as well, with lots of little touches that are sure to appeal to long-term fans of the franchise. Quality of this video is abhorrent. Whether that's the faraway sight of the aviary from Jurassic Park 3, or the beautiful rendering of the Jurassic Park San Diego amphitheatre, there's a lot of little designs here which show the love that went into some aspects of this mode. It's also a lot of fun to hop through the eras and, to an extent, see what could have gone differently. The problem really is that the mode simply doesn't go far enough for me. 3 of the 5 essentially boil down to having you build a park, but you've got a little bit more guidance, and 2 of them are short and unfulfilling to say the least. The mode was absolutely ripe for a little bit more gameplay experimentation and new ideas, but in the end Jurassic World Evolution 2 does what the first game always did, bang its head on the glass ceiling imposed by its own mechanical limitations. That is a fantastic line. I'm just saying. That's a great line. The start of these modes with the cast members and the setting and the lovely little nostalgic touches is always lovely and really enjoyable. It just doesn't last for the whole experience. It's still more enjoyable than challenge mode and the like, which it must be said has also been greatly improved by new, unique maps and a better research flow, and I'd really recommend playing through all 5 Chaos Theory maps and in order. I'm just always left wanting a little bit more. My frustration comes not from the mode not being good, because it is, it's a good mode, but it's not great, which I think it could be. What okay. Wait. Is great though, and the area where Jurassic World Evolution... Okay, cool, so let's talk about Chaos Theory for a little bit more then. Yeah, I mean, Chaos Theory, like I said, it's changed a little bit since release. It's easier now, you know, it's less frustrating in some ways, especially this one right here. This is the Jurassic Park one, which could have been insane at times back then, especially if you were new to the game, and the difficulty rankings the Chaos Theories had were way out of whack. They were an absolute mess. But Chaos Theory... I've never gone back to it. I don't know. I'd actually be really curious about you folks at home. Have any of you who've completed Chaos Theory modes gone back and played those Chaos Theory modes again down the line? For me, I never really felt the impetus to do so. And I do still have the same qualms with Chaos Theory that I had back then, in that you do end up just building parks. And again, it was kind of posited as this what-if scenario. And it never really felt like it for a lot of them. You know, it never just... I don't know whether it's a mandate from Universal in that they weren't allowed to toy with the franchise that much, but I suspect not. I just feel like it was held back a little bit, that they could have just turned the gears up a notch or two and really pushed it forward and done some crazier stuff with the story. I accept that the game does have inherent mechanical limitations, and Frontier, to their credit, have tried things to circumvent that, like the poaching mechanic, for example. I think was a really good inclusion that I think we need to see more of. Would have been a cool thing to have in Chaos Theory, in the other Chaos Theories. I still think it needs more. What I'd love to see is the integration of the first person mechanic a little bit more, stuff like that. I don't know. It's a hard. I don't know. It's tough. It is tough. I'll give them that, but it just felt like it could have been taken one notch higher. And if we ever get any more Chaos series, which I suspect we won't because they're all based on the films, but if we ever do, I hope they really do ramp it up a little bit. Evolution 2 absolutely smashes it out of the park, pun, is the dinosaurs themselves. Whilst the dinosaur roster itself has barely grown, with 6 new dinosaurs present if you buy the deluxe edition. Yeah, now, of course, we did get lots more pterosaurs, and we did get lots more lagoon creatures. The dinosaur roster, I retain, was a little disappointing at launch. I would have expected maybe 5 extra dinosaurs on top of the ones that we already got. And given in mind that was including the deluxe edition, the roster did feel a little bit lacking. It's definitely getting there now. And the Lagoon stuff does help, but that's only because the Lagoons are now more interesting. You know, when the Lagoons were super boring, the Lagoon creatures were interesting to look at a few times, but then they felt kind of ineffectual. The humongous amount of work put into dinosaur behaviours means they really are leaps and bounds better than the first game. Evolution 1 had a big problem where the dinosaurs would be beautiful to look at, but a limited library of behaviours meant they weren't interesting to watch in the long term. Evolution 2 does not have that problem. New unique social interactions for each species of dinosaur give them a real burst of life. Each animation is lovingly rendered and ranges from violent to agonizingly adorable. It really does make each species feel unique and individual. And that's not to mention the new pack hunting mechanics, feeding animations, the much improved dinosaur combat, fence climbing, and the absolutely incredible animations they really are that play when dinosaurs emerge from the hatcheries, each one again feeling unique and special to that species, giving them a huge dose of much needed personality. Yep, still all very true, and I think more than anything, when you go back and play the first game, and this is why the first game isn't very good in retrospect, the dinosaurs are super duper boring in the first game. There's room for improvement in the second game, of course, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I will say, to this day, the dinosaurs are still the great success of Evolution 2. It's kind of hard at this point because we kind of take it for granted, right? But the social animations weren't there in the past. The interesting feeders weren't there in the past. The ambient behaviors weren't there in the past. You could only release one dinosaur at a time and it didn't have an interesting animation. You know, there's so much work put into making the dinosaurs interesting that to an extent it kind of stymied the pain of not having that many new dinosaurs in the first place, because each of the existing dinosaurs suddenly felt more interesting. So I do retain that that is the big success story of Evolution 2 more than any other aspect, is the dinosaurs themselves, making them as interesting as possible. That said, I feel this is an area that initially was given lots of love, and in the recent DLCs, maybe a little bit less so. I talked about it a lot in the last pack, what was the last pack? Late Cretaceous? Whatever the last pack was, the animations all felt a little bit lacking. It feels like a really long time since we had a really interesting hatchery release animation. It feels like a really long time since we had a really interesting kill kind of thing. The Dominion pack brought the heat, I guess you would say, in that regard. The Quetzalcoatlus, for example, had some fantastic stuff. There's some limitations there we'll talk about in a little bit as well. But the kills and the exits for most of the dinosaurs I felt were a little bit on the boring side, and it's something I'd love to see them, again, go back to and push a little bit, because it's really exciting. And I've got attachment to lots of creatures in this game purely because of the quality of their exit animation or their attack animation, stuff like that. Like the Indominus Rex exit animation is incredible. The Leopleurodon, is it? Yeah, the Leopleurodon for some reason has an incredible exit animation, and it really does lend a lot of individuality and personality to these creatures, so I'd love to see it pushed again, because it feels like it's been slacking a little bit in the more recent DLCs. Furthermore, dinosaurs have been resized, with some once relatively boring species like, say, Cragdonsaurus, sorry Cragdon fans, now being interesting and, let's be honest, hella cute in their new teeny tiny form. That's not to say these systems are without issue. Pack hunting in particular is in dire need of a tune-up, as watching a couple of velociraptors destroy everything in its path really does verge on the ridiculous. And we can talk about that as well. Pack hunting has been changed quite a lot since release. It still needs changes, but pack hunting has been changed in some pretty cool ways, in that dinosaurs now have a certain number of dinosaurs that need to hunt them. Does that make sense? I can reword that. For example, to hunt a Brachiosaurus, I think there needs to be at least 3 Velociraptors or 4 Velociraptors or something like that. They've also buffed up the herbivores. They're now more defensible. They're likely to do more damage. They can actually escape from a hunt as well, which wasn't really there at release. If a Parasaurolophus is being pack hunted by a couple of raptors and they run out of stamina, the hunt can actually break off entirely. It's not a guaranteed kill. The one big qualm I still have with it, and that most people have with it, is it is still ridiculous for a Velociraptor to ever hunt down a Brachiosaurus. It just shouldn't be in the game. It should be. It just should. There's no way to make it work. It shouldn't be in the game. It should be taken out of the game. I know that's a bit of a shame. Rhymes with game, which is cool. They can hunt the smaller sauropods still, though. There's just. The game has a big problem with not giving its big sauropods the love they deserve. They should be able to fight back a little bit. They should be much harder to take down. They should be tough, monstrous walking mountains, essentially. And they never feel like that. But despite that problem that I do have, and I know a lot of you at home have, it is worth always mentioning the pack hunting is a lot better now than it was at release. It really is. But with a few balance tweaks and limitations, i.e. please don't let Brachiosaurus be pack hunted. It just doesn't make sense. A year ago, I was banging that drum, and I will continue to bang that drum. It'll be a nigh on perfect set of systems. All in all, the dinosaurs really are the high point of Evolution 2, as it probably should be. And if their relatively boring nature is what turned you off the first game, I think you'll enjoy the second a whole lot more. I still stand by that. Now, I've said all that, and I've not even touched on the addition of lagoons and aviaries, 2 new enclosure systems that house prehistoric pterosaurs and marine reptiles, ranging from Jurassic staples like Pteranodon and Mosasaurus to new inclusions such as Maurodactylus and the abyssal sea dragon. I mean, Elasmosaurus. I love Elasmosaurus, by the way, just putting it out there. The big weirdo. The aviaries are more successful than the lagoons. Leopleurodon being an out. You see what I mean? It looks so cool. Can we just have this back, please? Both are modular in that you can control their size. They can be as big or as small as you like, determined really only by map size limits. But the aviaries are more customizable, allowing tour vehicles to pass through them and allowing for terrain decoration on the inside. The lagoons themselves are, in comparison, a little bit boring, but both are filled with varied and again beautifully animated creatures. I wouldn't say they necessarily add a whole lot to the gameplay of Evolution, the lagoons again in particular, but they're a welcome addition that make your parks feel much more well-rounded, and I really am excited to see what new species get added to them in the coming months and years. Just please give me a submarine tour, please. There's also a new dinosaur skin system for your... Okay, let's talk about lagoons and aviaries then, before I move on. Most of that still rings true in that the lagoons are still not as interesting as aviaries, but they are catching up. Of course, our more recent big update really did a lot of good to make the lagoons a whole lot better. Not only do we have outside decorations, exterior decorations to make our lagoons look more interesting, but we can now put loads of rocks and sunken ships and dominant skeletons. We got a ton of new decorations and lights that we can line the interior of our lagoons with. We also have a new system that lightened, you see the water here is very, very foggy. That should be less of a thing now. You can actually see through your lagoons a little bit more. I would love that to one day be customizable. There is a slight problem in that the lagoon viewing gallery now has like this weird sheen on the glass, so you can't actually see in the bloody lagoon in the first place, but that's neither here nor there. I'm sure that'll be changed down the line. So the lagoons have been made a lot more interesting. And they're now enjoyable to decorate, and you can, drop your camera down into them and watch your creatures a little easier. They are a more included part of the game. They felt kind of like a side thought in the past. The one thing they really need is an attraction. If we could get a submarine tour or a tunnel system or just something that because they feel very separate from your park in a way. If you've got like a tour ride, it can go through the aviary, which was a fantastic addition to the aviaries that wasn't there in the previous game. So that's really cool. We just need the equivalent for the lagoons as well, so they feel more included as part of the parks on the whole. I think if the lagoons could have a tour system of some description, so I didn't have to keep sinking my bloody monorails down there, if they had a tour system of some description, they would be up there. They would feel nearly as good and complete as the aviaries and the standard exhibits. The other drawback of that is, again, I think the lagoon animals, and the aviary ones to an extent, but the aviary creatures can break out and eat people and all that kind of jazz. Lagoon creatures feel a little bit dull in some respects in terms of their behaviour. Now, we recently got another update in that regard, in that lagoon creatures, when they are distressed, they can't break out, but they will throw their bodies against the wall. which is very realistic behaviour for a lagoon creature, and looks great, and is really well animated and sound designed. My problem more comes from the fact that lagoon creatures don't have ambient behaviours, and they don't have social behaviours, and their hunting behaviours are strangely limited. They really are. They barely interact with each other at all. There's very few marine creatures that can hunt other marine creatures. So I'd love to see them pushed a little bit further in their behaviours. I'd love to see some social behaviours integrated into our lagoons. I think that'd be absolutely fantastic. Same with our pterosaurs, it must be said. And whilst we're on the pterosaurs as well, I want to briefly touch on the fact that this wasn't really an issue at release, but since release we've had Quetzalcoatlus added to the game, for example, and it flies around constantly and looks stupid. This was a terrestrial apex predator. It should be walking around on the ground. I understand completely that it's not part of the pterosaur's current coding, yada yada yada, and I'm sure it's not an easy thing to do, don't get me wrong, but Quetzalcoatlus doesn't currently feel like a Quetzalcoatlus. It feels like a giant pteranodon, essentially, which is a bit of a shame. And I think if you're going to have these very unique creatures, there needs to be a little love given to their actual behaviours. Also, the Barbaridactylus has fingers, which is stupid and it shouldn't have fingers. Moving on! Dinosaurs and marine and aviary creatures, offering you a lot more control and options as to how your creatures will look. The skin system is a lot better than it was, and it's even better now than it was at release. We get good, accurate skin previews. We've got the skin showcase thingamajiggy. We can randomize and include movie skins in that. Some of the skins have been fixed, like the Pteranodon, yada yada yada. There's still no preview for reasons I still can't fathom. We still don't have a proper preview, but you can check it in the species viewer at the very least. But the extra creative control is appreciated nonetheless. It's a good improvement from the previous game's limited system, and you really can make some really cool, interesting colour combinations. The second of Evolution 2's big hooks is the biome variety. Gone are the copy and paste tropical environments, with 4 new biomes now accessible to players: desert, taiga, alpine and temperate, along with the original game's tropical. Each of these has its own unique maps and foliage, with some absolutely spectacular maps available, including ones high up at the peak of snowy mountains, my personal favourite, or hiding in the bosom of a towering desert canyon. So worth noting that since this game came out, we of course got the new map on Biome Sanctuary, which is it Alpine? I think it's Alpine, it could be Taiga, I can't quite remember. But whilst it's not a new biome per se, it does have a new map effect in the fog, the mist that slinks across the map. It instantly made it my favourite map in the entire game, and it's that kind of effect, the mist, or something equivalent of that. If we could get that on a few more maps, it would really make them stand out and really make them feel unique. And that's the kind of thing right there, that mist, that fog effect, that I really want to see Frontier do more of. It's those individual personal little touches onto the maps, onto the buildings, onto the dinosaurs, onto the lagoon creatures, onto anything that is going to give the game a little bit more life. The maps are a little larger than the previous game, not gigantic, but really more than most players will ever need. But it's the biome variety that really stands out here. The same dinosaur park and experience can look wholly different in one biome compared to another, and it breathes new life into even the dinosaurs you've seen countless times over the last 3 years. A Brachiosaurus feels very different at the bottom of a canyon than it does on the shores of a Germanic beach or swaddled in tropical rainforest. Swaddled in tropical rainforest. Such a dick. It's true though, again, this is I think another thing we take for granted until you go back and play the first Evolution. In that every map, no matter how varied they were in some respects, Isla Pena, etc., really weren't that varied at all, and having this biome variety has done a lot of good for the game, and it's worth mentioning that since release Frontier have expanded the foliage options for each of the biomes as well. These biomes also carry new calamities. These are natural disasters like tornadoes and snowstorms, and they'll plunge your park into chaos. Whilst visually they're very different, sometimes looking fantastic, the snowstorms in particular, the end results tend to be largely the same. You're going to get a sharp decrease in park rating, a lack of money, and maybe a handful of broken fences and buildings. Sometimes some dinosaur injuries as well, appropriate ones, which is cool. There are certainly some nuances to each calamity, with unique effects like snowstorms slowing down your vehicles or blinding you to your dinosaurs' locations on the map. It's just that in practice they tend to have the same impact. It's hard to do more when the player is essentially a god hand, I think. Either way, though the map selection should be expanded. Why aren't the campaign maps in Sandbox? I have no idea. They are now. The biomes are a huge success, and I have been looking forward immensely to digging into them and building lots of varied parks across the selection. It's another big tick in Evolution 2's book, very successful. Very true. And very true about the disasters as well. It was a nice idea, and I think it was necessary, and it gave each map a little bit of personality, but the end result was largely the same. They didn't do much of anything, which is a bit of a shame, but it's also a very hard thing to think around. How would you make it any different? I think I came up with some suggestions in the past or for some alternate disasters, but it is quite a difficult thing to do. At the end of the day, you've got dinosaurs, you've got buildings, you can injure them, you can damage them, you can do some weird effects, but that's about it. The final big step forward then comes in the form of park management. There's been several notable additions here, too many to list in detail, but the big ones are the addition of time controls, scientists, guest types, and egg clutches. Let's discuss each one. Time controls really do what they say on the tin. They let you pause and speed up time as you please. This lets you catch your breath and plan your next move, or speed through some of the more tedious moments like dinosaur transportation or waiting for an egg to incubate. At its core, this is a good, even great addition, and the speed up tools in particular will come in handy basically constantly throughout your gameplay, making the entire experience snappier and less downtimey. It's a real word, don't look it up. There is one drawback, however, and that's that sometimes, as in-game timers, such as late-game dinosaur incubation, have clearly been adjusted to accommodate for the new time controls. The scientists are also a largely good addition. Okay. Time controls then. Time control, again, another thing that we take for granted. If you go back to the first game, the lack of fast forward in particular is immensely painful at times. I really, really appreciate the fast forward button in this game. And it is worth noting that since I said that comment about dinosaur incubation, and it would also count for like building production and stuff like that, Frontier has expanded the sandbox options at the very least to speed up those things. I think it could be taken further. Unless I'm totally crazy, we still not have an instant... Maybe we do have an instant egg occupation. Am I being crazy? I actually don't know for sure. I apologise, I can't remember. I might be just because I'm using Cardenics mod. But buildings and eggs should all be instant in Sandbox if you want them to be. There's really no reason for them not to be. At the moment, you can set it to 10%, which is fine for building construction and stuff like that. I don't see any reason it shouldn't just be straight up 0%, but maybe it's because it has to render the animation in order to make the building appear or something like that. The only other time-related drawback I will say, and that for some reason this is basically the only downgrade from Jurassic World Evolution 1, is that the capture mode that you just saw me using a second ago has lost the slow motion option, which was fantastically useful for capture mode. It really was fantastic. I used it all the time for my videos, and I'd love to see it come back. I don't know why it was removed in the first place, and it would be really cool to have that back in the game. You can recruit a stable of 10 or so scientists, each of which are named and come with backstories ranging from the ordinary to the weirdly odd. I have a preference for alien fanatics in my park personally. These scientists come with 3 skills: logistics, genetics and welfare, and different levels in each. You can train them up over time to raise these skills, and when a job needs doing, let's say incubating a dinosaur or extracting a fossil, you assign the scientists with the correct skill points to do the task. If the dinosaur needs 10 genetic points to be incubated, then a 5 and a 5, 2 scientists, would be able to do that task. It is a nice system all in all, adding an extra little layer to management, as not only do you need scientists with the right skill points, and also special perks like say quicker incubation, and also the right bios of course, but you need to rest them when they're not overworked and, take care of them a little bit. It's not the deepest system around, but given how bare bones the first game was in this regard, it's greatly appreciated. What's not appreciated is them being necessary in Sandbox, but we'll come to that later on. Worth noting then that the scientists are no longer mandatory in Sandbox. It took a while for that update to come along, but it is a humongous and positive change. The scientists, I think, added a little bit of management depth. I've kind of gone off them a little bit more over time since I made that video now. But they added a little depth to the campaign, a little depth to challenge mode, and stuff like that. My problem with them is that they're not necessarily a deep management, they're just another... It's all very surface level, and they're an extra addition to the surface. Nothing ever gets really below that point. It's, generally speaking, a problem with Jurassic World Evolution as a franchise. It's all very surface level stuff. Nothing here is very deep, nothing here is very involved. In any dinosaur management, scientist management, park building, all of it is very rudimentary in some respects. That said, the scientists were still an appreciated inclusion. They did add a little bit of depth, still paddling around in shallow end, but they did add a little bit of depth. And at the end of the day, the fact that we can now turn them off in sandbox is definitely a good step in the right direction. Guest types also deepen the management slightly, though... Nah, not really, let's be honest. Well, not by as much. Guests now come in 4 flavours, which I'm sure is appreciated by the carnivorous dinosaurs, with each type having a preference for particular activities. Adventurous guests may like tours, for example. This really, though, didn't feel like a factor in most game modes, because there's just no incentive to aim for one guest type over the other, except when the game explicitly tells you to do so. It does mean you need to adjust your shops to accommodate for your guests, and shops, by the by, are now much more customizable, both visually and internally, and there's an entire system where you choose interior shop modules to best satisfy the type of guests you have in your park. It's a good system. But all in all, I wouldn't say I often felt the impact of this change. It does come with some good changes to how star rating works in your park, which is now wholly determined by income and not the awkward facility dinosaur split we had in the past game, as well as an increased focus on shelter management, path management, and a few other little details. All in all, park management itself is deeper without being necessarily complex, and I think with a little more incentive offered to cater to certain guest types, it could be a wholly positive change across the board. It's not going to stand up against the best this genre can offer, but it does a lot to combat the downtime that really plagued the previous game. Finally, still very true, nothing in that regard has really changed, if we're honest. It's interesting hearing this back because obviously when the game first came out, I was playing challenge mode, I was playing the campaign, I was playing Chaos Theory, and now I only play sandbox, and that's typically how these games go. You play everything at the start, and then you end up in the sandbox mode because why else would you do anything else, I suppose? So a lot of these factors I'm talking about are no longer really factors, at least for me personally, so I feel less comfortable talking about them. I don't know how many people out there are still playing the game from now to release and regularly run into the shop management system or regularly run into the guest flavor system, etc, etc. Again, it's another one of those things that added depth to the game, but not in a real way. It's another thing in the shallow end rather than adding to the actual depth, if that makes sense. It's still better than the first game. If you're looking for a deep, involved management sim, though, Jurassic World Evolution 2 was never going to be that game. Then there's the new egg clutch incubation system. Essentially, instead of producing a single dinosaur, you synthesize a clutch of eggs ranging from 1 to 10 depending on the species selected. You then choose which eggs you want to incubate, and all of those dinosaurs will be released together in the aforementioned fairly incredible animations. These eggs will contain a few random genetics. You may get one Velociraptor extra aggressive, needs big territory, whereas another may be timid and shy and not want to socially interact with members of its own species. These genes can be adjusted as in the past game, but really never to the point where there are guarantees. It makes each hatching a more exciting occasion and finally gives us behaviour impacting genes that we so badly wanted the last time around. Unfortunately, there's no way to randomise skin colour in these hatchings, so all the dinosaurs always come out looking identical. So worth noting, of course, that has been changed. I completely forgot that wasn't in game at release because it seems so obviously necessary at this point in time. But you can now randomise, so if you were going to birth all 6 of these Proceratosaurus we can see on the screen, you could make it so each one had a randomised skin and pattern, and that is definitely a really one of the bigger changes the game has had, and definitely necessary and a huge step in the right direction. The ability to select from a batch of colours would be a huge improvement to the system and should be one of the top priorities for post-game improvement. Which apparently it was. As it stands, the dinosaurs have a great new skin system and a cool new egg clutch system, but it's harder to showcase because they all emerge identical unless you only make one egg at a time, which sort of defeats the point anyway. I really forgot this wasn't in the game. I'm kind of blown away by this. Like, why was there no randomised colour option from the start? That's mad to me. But hey, we've got it now, that's the good thing. Room for improvement, but it's an extra choice to the player, an extra process requiring thought, and I think that's really a positive for Evolution 2. I want to touch briefly on a couple of things here, just small details. I mentioned the territory system very briefly there, a much hyped new system wherein the animals will emerge with a radius surrounding them and indeed members of their own species, and the radius must include the food, water, new environmental needs like rock and sand, and prey needs that each species has. If they don't find it, they'll explore their environment until they do. If I'm honest, the system felt lacking in impacting regular gameplay simply because you're unlikely to make huge exhibits when you're playing challenge mode or chaos theory mode. Instead, it's a system designed for Site B type parks or wide-ranging sandbox parks. It's an interesting idea, but I think it'll be a little neutered unless the territory search radius comes down a little bit, and you're therefore forced to accommodate certain species in certain parts of each exhibit. I kind of say that's still true. It's funny in that a lot of the good changes to this game are ones that I feel would only really come to fruition if you were playing sandbox, but not creative sandbox. When I play sandbox, I turn everything off. I just want to be able to build whatever I want and release all the dinosaurs I want. I think if you played sandbox but kept more of the limitations on and played it more like a JPOG style challenge mode, a lot of the aspects of Jurassic World Evolution 2 would then become more powerful. I also want to give a little shout out here to the sound design in the game. It doesn't really fit neatly anywhere else, but it's full of amazing little touches like a JPOG-esque Carcharodontosaurus roar or a particularly nice little touch that I spotted wherein a screaming guest will have their cries muffled every time a dinosaur closes its mouth around their head. I absolutely love that change, and again the sound design in this game is absolutely phenomenal and one of the actual high points. It's a horribly lovely little detail. And really that does sum up a lot of Evolution's good touches. The dinosaur animation, modelling, texture, AI work and sound design is, across the board, outstanding. It is leaps and bounds ahead of the first game in that regard, and if that's why you're hesitant, then I can only recommend jumping in on the sequel. That said, whilst the review has been largely positive, there are a few caveats that I want to discuss. If we think back to Evolution 1, it had the bones of a good game there, but hamstrung by boring dinosaurs, a lack of content, and some pretty weird design decisions. Evolution 2 is the bones of a potentially great game, I would say, this time with beautiful dinosaurs and overall I would say more fulfilling content, but it is once again hamstrung by some weird design choices.
Let's see how many of these are still in the game, I'm very curious.
A lot of these are relatively easy fixes, it must be said, and I'd expect when the public get their hands on the game, that's you guys, the voices in these areas will become louder, but I'd be doing you a disservice to not mention them at all now, so here we go. So, I've already discussed the overtly powerful pack hunting, a system we all wanted and generally well implemented, but in dire need of severe balance changes. It
has been balanced, it still needs further tweaks, it does again. Large sauropods just shouldn't be pack hunted. Maybe I'm more alone in that thought process than I think I am, but I don't think I am based on your comments at home. It shouldn't be in the game. However, that said, pack hunting in general was absolutely busted strong at release, and it has been toned down considerably since then and made more interesting with the integration of some more behaviours. So generally speaking, I would say this is a tick in Frontier's favour.
Fact that the Jurassic Park era doesn't come with any lagoons or aviaries.
Also fixed, Jurassic Park now has a lagoon building and an aviary building.
Despite the fact Sierradactylus is in the game, a pterosaur literally here because it's in the first Jurassic Park novel. And that's not to mention that all the campaign buildings are also missing from sandbox mode, as is the San Diego Amphitheatre, except in the appropriate map.
So the San Diego Amphitheatre is still locked off, unfortunately, but all the campaign buildings, all the DFW buildings, all the research buildings, are now also available in sandbox mode, so free for free so far.
Now maybe these are inherent limitations, they could well be, because mixed eras aren't possible on last gen consoles, but I find it hard to believe it wouldn't be possible on PC at the very least. We saw with the last game that what players really wanted was more choice. Doesn't matter if it's map appropriate, we just want to do as much as we can. So why are we once again being hamstrung?
Yeah, it is funny to me that Frontier didn't really learn that lesson from the first game per se. I suspect time constraints more than anything else probably played a role, if I'm honest, but who knows. I still think we should have the amphitheatre. I still think every building should always be accessible. At the end of the day, you can look at it and say, okay, why would you want to put the amphitheatre in the middle of a rainforest? Because it looks stupid. Yeah, maybe it does, but just let me do it. It's my choice, surely. Like, you don't need to control that aspect of the game. There's just no need, particularly in sandbox mode. So I would say there's no reason to limit us in that regard, but they have been a lot better about that, especially with the addition of the campaign buildings.
This applies to the decorations as well. Individual trees have been removed, and for some reason so has the raptor paddock.
Yeah, did we get the raptor paddock back? We got the raptor paddock back, right? Yeah. And we got the individual trees back as well.
decorations in general are substantially better than they were in the first game. There's still a couple of notable misses, benches and bins. For some reason, people have been crying out for benches and bins for like 5 years now, and we still don't have benches and bins, but decorations in general have been expanded upon hugely. They really are substantially better than they were in the first game, which scarcely had a decoration system to speak of.
It was already designed and modelled and textured and in the game, so why is it gone? Same applies to the Jurassic Park 3 Pteranodon, which has either been removed or is doing a world champion routine right now at hide and seek.
I remember the conversations we all have when the game first came out. People desperately trying to find the Jurassic Park 3 Pteranodon because we saw it in the game files. It was there, it just wasn't included in the bloody game. And people were hunting it down and trying lots of different things in Chaos Theory to try and unlock it. Eventually, of course, the Jurassic Park 3 Pteranodon did get added, and it was teeny tiny. And then in the last major update, it finally got resized. It's finally full-sized again, and it's as beautiful as the day we lost it. It could do now with a texture overhaul because it's bigger, yada yada yada. But the point is, this is yet another thing that has been addressed since release.
Sandbox has been limited greatly by the removal of the combat option. Can't understand that one at all. But potentially even worse is the continued lack of both instant incubation, which is even more important now, I would suggest, and the reliance on scientists still existing in sandbox mode. It's a sandbox, yet you have to build several staff centres, recruit and train all of your staff, and then keep assigning them to every single task you do. It's a good addition, as I say, to the main game management, but it really feels tedious in sandbox mode.
And it's been removed, so we're all good on that front.
There's no Jurassic Park era challenge mode.
No, there isn't.
Again, another thing that was present in the last game before being removed for some reason, and the lack of campaign maps in Sandbox seems like an oversight to me as well.
Also been fixed.
Oh, and egg clutches aren't guaranteed to be full on Sandbox, and again, I have no idea why.
Yeah, that was a really weird bug. It wasn't really a bug so much as... Actually, it was a bug, but also the option was really weirdly written so that you couldn't really tell if it was on or off, and I believe that the on was actually off and the off was actually on, is how it was for a long time. That's been fixed as well. Egg clutches, you can now guarantee a full egg clutch on sandbox mode.
Dinosaurs fight each other for dominance and have a whole new injury system, which is fantastic, but they do it far too often, and I find myself constantly flying Pachyrhinosaurs back and forth to my paleomedical facility, even though they were entirely happy in their enclosure.
No longer an issue as well. That's been toned down a lot. Dinosaurs fight each other a lot less for dominance, and small injuries can be automatically taken care of by your ranger teams and by the outpost section, yada yada yada.
That's not to mention that the MVU, and that's your dinosaur healing vehicle, will scan a dinosaur, discover that it has a minor wound, i.e. one that can be cured in the field, and then it'll proceed to drive away and not actually cure the bloody thing.
You have no idea how annoying I found that at release. It was so ridiculous. But again, has been fixed.
I just don't get that. Finally, we still lack a bunch of key buildings like, say, the T-Rex Kingdom or Indominus Paddock, and there's a huge dearth of guest attractions.
Yep, still a big thing, and if there's one area in this game, along with a Lagoon attraction, again, I feel like this is a drum I've been beating for such a long time, but attractions is a huge thing missing from making our park building more interesting. Really, we've got a variety of towers and viewing platform things, and we've got a few tours that are all functionally identical, and that's about it. We only have, you would say, realistically, 3 types of attraction in the game. Considering JPOG came out over 20 years ago and had more than that, it really does feel needlessly lacking when it comes to Evolution 2, and that still hasn't been addressed in the slightest. We haven't had a single new attraction in the last year for Evolution 2. That said, as I did a video on a few weeks ago, there is a little suggestion, a little bit of hint in the files that maybe, and I again take this with a truckload of salt, there's nothing guaranteed, that maybe there is a new attraction on the way. Sometime this year, sometime next year, who knows, but something was spotted in the game files. I'm not going to go much further into it, I've got a video on that if you want to check it out, but the point is that maybe finally it's happening. I honestly think the game needs about 3 or 4 more attractions to fix that issue.
A lot of these are things that I think maybe could have been caught before release. Hell, maybe some of it will be fixed for the upcoming Day 1 patch.
but I can't wrap my head around removing content that was already added in the first game.
Like the slow motion mode. I didn't even bring it up, but slow motion mode. Still not there. Still not there. Although we did get Peath of Path, it's worth mentioning.
Some of this might feel a little bit nitpicky to you. This is more for people who are going to really put their time into this game. But I'm just trying to highlight the things that have irked me throughout my own playtime, which is about 40 hours at this point. And the sandbox limitations and the presence of scientists there is absolutely top of that list. On the plus side, however, P does now open the path tool, and that alone makes the game worth picking up in my opinion. We finally did it, YouTube. We finally did it. Shout out.
For those who don't know, for the entirety of Jurassic World Evolution 1, I was beating the drum that P should open the path tool, okay, for PC players. When I went to play the game in LA, I was playing like an early access version of the game before the game even came out, months before the game even came out. And I was sat with Nick Rogers, who was, I think, lead animator, or one of the animators at the very least on Evolution, and one of the influencer people, and we had a lovely time. It was a fantastic time. And he said at the end, do you have any comments, anything you would change, anything you want to add? And I said, P should open the path tool. And that was before the first game came out, and it never happened, but it is here in Evolution 2. I don't know if I had anything to do with that, but I would like to think so.
That's Frontier for that one. Now I've ended this review on a negative note, a slightly negative note. I just had to get that off my chest. But really what I'd like you to remember is that it has been a largely positive experience. I know people who didn't particularly enjoy the first game, they found it shallow and the dinosaurs dull, and they've enjoyed the second a whole lot more, even just during this pre-release cycle. It is a substantial improvement, a better game than the first in countless ways. Now I dislike review scores in general, but as it stands I'd put the game at a 7.5 or so. If the aforementioned problems are fixed, or at least the ones the community agrees are problems, then I can see it being an 8 and even an 8.5 by the end of its lifespan if it gets continued support, a wider roster, and in particular some good Dominion additions when that film comes out. A 7.5 is a really good score though. I don't want people to see 7.5 and think it's mediocre or something. Review scores these days seem to start at 6. It's bizarre to me. 7.5 is a good score. And an 8.5 if it makes it, and don't get me wrong, Evolution 2 can definitely make it to an 8.5, is an actually great game, up there with some of the greater games of our time. This is all just my opinion at the end of the day, and I may be harsh at times just because I once again really love this series. I really like Frontier as a company, I love Evolution as a game series, and I want to see it be as good as it can be. It just needs a little bit of love really. Don't we all?
I haven't watched this video in preparation, I'm just reacting, and I bloody knew I was going to say that, I tell you. So, I gave the game a 7 to 7.5, which I think is probably fair at release. Maybe verging on generous. In retrospect, I'd probably knock it down to a 7. Let's think about now. If this was the release version of Evolution 2, if they delayed release a year, let's say all the DLC is folded in. I do tend to include the DLC. It's worth noting that when it comes to the DLC, the free update tends to be the better part of that, but the DLC has obviously added a lot of creatures to the game. We've got some great new maps, some new buildings with the Dominion package, yada yada yada. A lot of my issues with the game have been addressed. The majority of the big issues with the game have been addressed. I'd say the lack of attractions is really the major thing holding the game back as a park builder. That and the lack of interesting gameplay loop, in that I just feel like I don't even know what it would be. I'm not a game designer at the end of the day. I don't know how you would do it. I just feel like there must be something else that can be done to make the minute-to-minute gameplay a little bit more interesting somehow. There's just a little something. And there's a few things I wish were changed, like the terrain system is better in this game, but I wish it was a little bit less limited. You know, we keep using mods to make it better, but I'd like to see it made a little bit better by default. But still, the game is in a substantially better place. I would probably give it an 8 at the moment. An 8 to 8. I reckon it's an 8. And if we do get some new attractions, let's say we get 2 or 3. 3. I think it needs 3. But let's say we get 2 or 3, 3 or 4 new attractions over the coming patches. Even if they're just, you know, variants on tours, you know, like a balloon tour, a helicopter tour, a submarine tour is a huge one. Even static attractions, you know, I think the Bone Shaker would be a fantastic addition, stuff like that. Just stuff that makes it feel more like a Jurassic World rather than a zoo. I kind of go between those two options quite a lot, but that would be good. I think it can be an 8.5. I think it's on the verge. I think a lot of my nitpicky problems have been dealt with. Not everything, but the majority. Oh, that's the end of the video. Oh, did I really end with that comment about love? There you go. There's a throwback to your patrons for a year ago. Right, so that is my 50-minute long re-review. Jesus Christ. I thought this was going to be such a short video. Yeah, I think it's a much better game now than it was. I'm still enjoying playing it. Yeah, I know I'm modding the bejeebus out of it, but I always do that. That's just how I like to play games. It's not so much a comment on Evolution 2 itself. People always take mods as an attack on Frontier or an attack on Evolution 2, and that's really not the way it's meant to be. It's just when you've got hundreds of hours into a game, there's only so much content that developers can make, you know, and I want more of the game, so I add more to the game. I don't expect Frontier to add everything that modders add, because that's just not realistic, even if they keep adding all the things that Kyodenic adds. But beyond that, you know, we mod the game because we want more of it, not because we have a problem with the game itself. Sure, sometimes you're adding little things, but there's things in Kyodenic's mods that I love, like my ability to rotate buildings, that I would never expect the Basil game to have. There's a few things that would be nice. Instant incubation, instant building, amphitheater access, yada yada yada. I feel like if things are in the game, then in Sandbox they should be accessible. But the point really is that the game... I'll just mute this and we can let it play in the background. The point is the game really is a lot better than it was in the past. It's come a long way. A lot of my problems have definitely been fixed. There's been some good DLC, some really good free updates. The only thing I think it really, really needs is attractions. There's a few other things I've talked about in a fairly recent video about things that Evolution 2 could do with. But new attractions, slow motion mode on the camera, and I'd be pretty bloody happy. I really would. We're getting there, folks. We're getting there. And more interesting animations in the newer dinosaurs. The DLC creatures need a little bit more love than they've been getting, in my opinion. I mean, because look at this Leopleurodon animation. It's so cool. Like, I don't even like the Leopleurodon as a design, really. But I've grown to love it. Purely because of how cool this exit animation is. It's so good. I don't know why they went so hard with Leopleurodon, but they did. Anyways, I'm going to give Evolution an 8.25. Because I feel like it's better than an 8, but not quite made it to 8.5 until we get those things I've talked about. But I'd love to hear from you folks at home, those of you who've managed to sit through this humongous bloody video. Let me know what you think, let me know what score you would give the game, and yeah, thank you so much for joining me. 1 year anniversary. Time really flies. Now, Evolution 1 only had a 2-year support span. I'm really hoping Evolution 2 gets more. I know people haven't necessarily taken to the game. I know the numbers aren't phenomenal. I mean, Planet Zoo is doing better somehow. I don't know how that keeps happening. But I hope it's doing well enough that we keep getting more. And I will champion the game for as long as I can as well, because I think it's still the best way to experience dinosaurs, basically. Yeah. Thanks for joining me. If you like and enjoyed the video, cheers much as always. Bye-bye.
Reaching out.